In previous lessons, we've talked about rolling backup, vamping backup, up the neck backup, and even bluesy 3/4 backup, but something we haven't talked about yet is slow backup. Obviously, you can play all the things that I just mentioned at a slow tempo, but what I'm talking about is playing slow backup in the style of J.D. Crowe or Sonny Osborne, like this.
South Carolina, there are many tall pines.
So let's go over everything you're going to need to get started playing in this style. But first I should mention this. One of the challenges of playing in this style is that it can get a little complicated. It doesn't have to be complicated, but in order to understand some of the more interesting licks and patterns, it can be helpful to have a little music theory and fretboard knowledge. But that doesn't necessarily get in the way of you playing any of this material. I find a lot of the time that it can be really helpful to play through some of this stuff before you understand it. The understanding will come later, but if you understand it first, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to play it. For some banjo players, it can be really useful to understand exactly what it is that you're playing, understanding where each note is and what each chord is and how they all interact with each other. But there are a lot of players, really great players, people that wrote the language of the music that we're playing, that don't really understand music theory that clearly. And all that means to me is that you don't necessarily need the music theory. It's very helpful to me, but it might not be helpful to you. Either way, we just want to play this stuff. So if you come across anything that I say that doesn't really make a lot of sense to you, focus on what it is that I'm playing, and just focus on what I'm playing on what chord. So if I play something over a G chord, just keep in mind you can play that on a G chord. You don't necessarily need to know all that much more about what it is that I'm playing. Anyway, let's start with the basics, with some chord shapes that you probably already know, and a rhythmic pattern that isn't going to give anyone too much trouble. If this is all you ever do with slow backup, then great. It sounds great, it's not going to get in anyone's way, and there's nothing wrong with playing simple. But there's a little bit more to what JD and Sonny are doing. And in order to play in that style, we're going to need some more chord shapes and some more rhythmic patterns. You may have seen some of these shapes before, but our goal here is to play all the way up and down the neck, playing all the chords in the key of G major. We can also use the same shapes using this rhythmic pattern instead. So using these shapes and these rhythmic patterns, you can play some more interesting backup on any of the chords in the key of G major. But let's talk about that F sharp diminished. You're probably not going to have to play F sharp diminished very often in a bluegrass setting. But that's okay because we're going to use this chord in a much more interesting way. The notes in this chord are F sharp, A, and C. And as it turns out, the notes in the chord D7 are D, F sharp, A, and C. So if we play F sharp diminished when we get to a D chord on the way back to a G chord, then it's going to give us a great D7 sound. Now again, if this is over your head, then that's totally fine. You don't necessarily need to know exactly what notes are in each chord all the time. Just think about this. The F sharp diminished shapes you can use on D. So using all this information, here's how we can play over a 1-4-5 progression in G. Okay, now we're going to take this one step further with something called passing chords, which are just chords that we play on the way from one chord to another. And to do that, we're going to use these shapes. Hopefully you've noticed that these shapes are basically the same as the other shapes we've already covered, but with the note on the second string removed. Because we've removed that note, each of these shapes can actually function as two different chords. But the real value of these shapes is that we can use them to transition from one chord to another, like this example, moving from G to C. And you can do the same thing on the way from D back to G. Another way you can use these shapes is to approach a chord with the same shape from one fret below, like this transition from C to D. Or this transition from G to C. So here's a 1-4-1-5 progression in G using some of these more interesting transitions. All of this gives us a ton of options when it comes to playing in this style, but there's one thing that's missing. If we really want to be fluent in this style, then we have to develop a vocabulary of fill-in licks that aren't just the same standard chord shapes. As an example, here's one of my favorite banjo players, Kristen Scott Benson, playing some great fill-in licks on the song Windy City.
We came to you, big city, from our little country town. And every step she takes with you is down. But you're as cold and heartless as your chilling winds that blow. Before you freeze her heart, please let her go.
I love this example because she's not playing anything other than some really tasteful, well-placed fill-in licks. So here's a close-up view of those licks.
We came to you, big city, from our little country town. And every step she takes with you is down. But you're as cold and heartless as your chilling winds that blow. Before you freeze her heart, please let her go.
Now, in an attempt to be as thorough as possible with learning this style, let's see if we can fit some of our chord patterns around these licks.
We came to you, big city, from our little country town. And every step she takes with you is down. But you're as cold and heartless as your chilling winds that blow. Before you freeze her heart, please let her go.
I actually wouldn't change anything about what Kristen's playing here, but for the sake of practice, it can be really helpful to pack as much information as you can into a situation so that you have a lot of choices when you're playing live. So by now you might be thinking that this is a lot of information, and it is. But in terms of learning it, you should probably just start at the beginning and take your time. It's the same as anything else. That's what I did, that's probably what Kristen Scott Benson did, and that's what JD and Sonny did when they were developing this kind of style. And if you're looking for more playing in this style, then you can check out some other videos I've posted, like Jim Mills' version of How Great Thou Art, or JD Crow's kickoff and backup on Tennessee Blues. And if you're looking for tablature for all that, as well as all the examples that I've played today, then you can head to patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo. That's where I post tablature and bonus practice tips and live streams, all kinds of stuff that you can't find here on YouTube. And if you like this video and you want to learn more about bluegrass banjo, then go ahead and subscribe to this channel and let me know in a comment below what else you'd like to hear about in a video like this. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.